Okay, hi everyone. I see 15 minutes goes by really quickly, so I'm gonna try to go over.
think it's 15. I think.
Yeah, I think so. So I'm gonna try to go over something really complex really quickly. If you have questions, we can totally address them at the end. Yes, I forgot I'm doing karaoke today. Um, is this okay? Perfect. Okay, so I'm here on behalf of myself and Johanna Weststar, as well as the First 3 Years Project, to talk about an exploration of a lost generation of workers. Um, what does this project consist of? Essentially, Johanna and I are part of a larger team called the First 3 Years. This is a multi-year, multi-institutional project, and we're looking at really understanding the career trajectories of recent games development graduates. And the research that I'm presenting today is part of a larger study. So just keep that in mind. The full project spans about 4 years and includes two cohorts of participants. We total talked to about 203 game students who are about to graduate and then talked to them 1 year later. We also interviewed about 14 game educators and 42 industry professionals as well that I will be talking about to kind of contextualize the data that we've found. So, before moving on, I think it's important to understand the context. Essentially, for those unfamiliar with the gaming industry, it's been in a boom. Essentially, the industry has been rapidly expanding for a while to meet consumer demand. Games have been become a huge profit driver within the entertainment sector, but also a huge space for technological innovation. But a spoiler alert: with every boom or rise, you eventually do have to have a fall, and unfortunately, that is a little bit of where we are right now. We've seen consumer demand reduce a little bit, but we've also seen the market trying to adjust to that. This has resulted in a really unprecedented downsizing of the industry. We've seen studios close, getting acquired, mergers. We've seen thousands in the North American sector of layoffs, and more layoffs seem to be announced every single week. So we are in a bit of a desperate state here. And that brings us to our quest at the First 3 Years Project. We're really trying to understand what's going on. And so we're looking at understanding the experiences of new graduates in securing employment and how their experiences at work generally are. We also want to understand how these experiences were exacerbated by one's identity, including intersectional identities, as marginalized and minoritized workers try to crack into this industry. And we also wanted to consider how industry professionals, as well as educators and educational institutions, are contributing to a system that is potentially unjust to new graduates and this generation of games workers. So, our toolkit, or what we did, essentially, we painstakingly coded about 350 interviews using a grounded grounded theory technique. We also coded nearly 50 interviews from educators as well as professionals. And every year, people also fill out a pre-interview survey. So that gives us some quantitative analysis to add a little flavor to our qualitative as well. So I'll be talking first about understanding the student perspective. Essentially, it's no surprise students are really entering their educational programs or looking for a credential to level up their skills. They want to get skills so that they can get a job. And that's really the narrative that we do sell people in general. If you do more school, then you hopefully will get a job, right? But we know that that's not necessarily true. Students are promised when they go into schools experiences with companies. They are promised connections to industry professionals. And so they don't really get those, unfortunately. Instead, they leave with a lot of theoretical knowledge, which is great, and more abstract games work. So, like working on games in teams and things like that. And they leave with a generalist toolkit, essentially a jack of all trades, a little bit of a master of none. And we have to ask the question, is this enough for a job on this particular market? Again, spoiler alert, no, unfortunately, it is not. That's really our hero's challenge here is the labor market. Students are struggling out there. We've talked to people who have sent out dozens, if not like close to like 50 to 100 applications, really just to hear back and get rejected from each and every single one. So that doesn't sound very fun at all. Only about 39% found employment in the industry, and those were often through connections or previous internship experience that they found on their own. And often these positions were underpaid when we consider cost of living in a particular area. So the conditions are obviously not very ideal on the labor market as it is. Those who are getting by are doing so because of family help or a potential nest egg. They don't necessarily have debt to worry about, which is a huge consideration, especially in the United States. So there is an aspect of privilege to this as well. And so students point out that this is just the disparate state of what is going on in the industry. We see that there is stiff competition. Market conditions and layoffs have made it so people are not just competing against their cohort, they're competing against someone who just lost their job, who has 5+ years of experience. And how do you really compete with that as a new graduate? This has also essentially made the word entry level kind of a misnomer because if an entry level position requires you to have 10 years of experience and three shipped games under your belt, then is that really entry level? I don't think so personally. Again, this just alludes to the idea that only the very best, the very lucky, or the very privileged really have a chance at making it in games in the current market. Those who do find themselves fortunate enough to have a job in games find that they have very inconsistent experiences. We see that for contract workers, the situation is extremely precarious. They don't have really any sort of month to month or year to year job stability. And then for full time workers, we see that the trade-off for this stability is that they become at the beck and call of their employer. So they are sensitive to intense time pressures and crunch. Crunch is a video game-y term for just unlimited unpaid overtime, which isn't very fun. And I think this was touched upon by other presenters today, is that many are happy to just really take what they can get a little bit. They're just happy to work in games point blank. And so they don't want to make a scene at work. They don't want to talk about any of the negative instances that they might experience at work. And they don't want to talk about the culture that's eating away at them because they get to work in games. I do want to spend some time talking about the marginalized voices in games because before I did mention that privilege is a factor, and that isn't just financial privilege. Of course, it includes um, diverse identities as well. And so games have long been known to be a broy space for both players and for workers. And so there has been progress on making representation matter in games themselves and to make games themselves more diverse, as well as to a degree to make the people who make games diverse in turn. But close to half of participants are concerned about their identities and how those identities are going to impact them and their careers going forward in games. On the right, you can see this quote, and it talks about the harassment that a woman has faced within the games industry. And it is clear that harassment is still rampant within the games industry and highlights the toxic cultures that people have to navigate if they wanted to pursue their passion and career in games. Some participants, and this goes back to Amanda talking about maybe like microaggressions and more subtle forms of what people are experiencing at work. Concerns about being left out, not fitting in, being the butt of the joke. These things are issues that are faced by marginalized workers as they navigate their roles and find their footing. And this is especially disheartening, I think, in games because games are generally a safe space for people they are, especially for marginalized workers and players, they might see themselves in a form of representation, and this is why they wanted to kind of pursue a career in games. So it is kind of unfortunate that they are facing this kind of discrimination as they pursue their passion. So, how do we win this game? Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we can with the way that the system is set up. So essentially, if you want to, you have to have your own connections. You have to be willing to work in whatever conditions are there, spread yourself thin during your academic training, and burn yourself out at work. And then you have to be leaving your identity at the door and be just like everybody who works in tech. Does that sound fair to you? I don't think so. So, who is maintaining the status quo? Schools are partially, and educational institutions are responsible to a degree for maintaining this. They don't necessarily exist to spit out employees. They exist to teach theoretical basis for game development, to create a solid foundation. They operate on a bums and seats model, quote unquote. I don't know how that'll be translated, but they try to appeal to what's new, right? They want people in the chairs in the university, and so they create these programs without maybe the infrastructure to back that up. So students themselves, they're entering, they want to learn, obviously, and they. But first and foremost, I think most people like to eat and live and lead a happy life. And I don't know that a lot of the students that we've talked to felt like they could do that with the salaries that they're making or without the jobs. So very few schools have been able to offer the practical experiences that were promised to them initially. And many make claims that their students are actually finding jobs, but that's really the exception and it's not the rule. Many students burn out before they can even get out of school. And 2 minutes, okay, I can do it. The role of the industry, obviously, it's not just schools, it's professionals who are maintaining this as well. They're not off the hook. For schools to be able to offer applied experiences, they need people to partner with them to offer these sorts of opportunities. So the industry must be willing to cooperate with them. And if professionals want great workers to choose from, then they need to be willing to provide experiences and training so that students and new graduates can hit the ground running. But professionals do say that they're trying to they need to move with the market, and they're trying to stay afloat as it is. So essentially, like we see on the quote on the right, people acknowledge that we need someone who can hit the ground running. And this individual actually says, like, maybe I'm part of some problem. And I would tend to agree. It's a system or a cycle that is leaving new graduates out of the market. And I will just wrap up with let's fix everything. Here's 4 things that we can do tomorrow. No, it's a super complex issue. These are just 4 pieces that we can talk about later as well in the Q&A. But I think that maybe starting with a better internship model or practicum model, we know that through other careers like teachers and clinicians, you need to like show through hours worked that you know how to do the job. But this again requires the involvement of the industry as well as potentially the government to incentivize these types of programs. It's also important that schools stop making false promises. So there needs to be better tracking of alumni as well as their professionalization experiences to actually accurately depict the promises that they can make to students entering their programs. Companies need to be aware of the additional hurdles obviously faced by minoritized and marginalized employees. So this needs to be considered in selection and recruitment, so understanding representation and diverse voices, but also in policies protecting marginalized workers at work. And finally, this is kind of a shameless plug to my supervisor as well as some other great talks here, but unionization and a collective voice can be very, very strong and important in protecting all voices, including games workers, as they pursue their passions at work. And I did think I made it under 15 minutes. So thank you to my first 3 years team. And that's my email and our website if you're interested. Cool. Thank you.